Blood on snow looks black in moonlight, not red. I remember thinking that as I knelt over my father's steward, my hands pressed uselessly against a wound that would not close. And somewhere behind me, my stepmother was screaming my name in a voice pitched exactly for the ears of the imperial censor who happened, so conveniently, to be visiting that week. Su Waning has gone mad. Su Waning attacked the household. Someone restrain her. I did not attack anyone. I had simply loved a dog that did not belong to me, and for that, my family burned my life down to the roots. That was the last thing I remembered before the dark took me. The cold of the courtyard stones through my knees, the steward's blood cooling under my palms, and my stepmother's tears. Real tears, the kind she had trained herself to produce on command over 14 years of turning me into the family's favorite cautionary tale. I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that comes right before dying, that I had spent my whole life being generous to people who kept a ledger of my weaknesses instead of my kindnesses. And then nothing. Then, impossibly, rain. I opened my eyes to rain falling through a gap in rotted lattice, and I was 11 years old again, lying on a cot in the servants' quarter of the Sioux Manor, and outside in the storm something was scratching weakly at the garden gate. I did not question it. Whatever gods or demons had seen fit to hand a dead woman her childhood back, I was not fool enough to spend the gift on disbelief. I lay there in the dark and let 18 years of memory settle into an 11-year-old body like sediment in still water, and when it had all settled, when I understood exactly what tonight was, I got up and I went to the gate because I already knew who was scratching at it. The garden gate of the Sioux Manor stood at the edge of the eastern wall, where the ornamental plum trees gave way to a drainage ditch nobody bothered to maintain, and it was there, in my first life, that I found a black dog half drowned in mud, its ribs showing through matted fur, one eye swollen shut from a wound that should have killed it. I had been a foolish, soft child then, starved myself of affection so badly that I gave all of mine to a dying animal nobody else wanted. I fed it from my own bowl, I hid it in the disused woodshed behind the kitchens, I told it my secrets, the way children tell secrets to things that cannot repeat them, and for 2 months it was the only creature in that entire estate who did not require me to earn its regard. Then my stepmother's poodle went missing, and my half-sister said she'd seen a stray near the woodshed, and the story wrote itself the way stories always did in that house, with me as the villain. They found the dog, they beat it half to death in front of me to teach me a lesson about attachment, and I did the single stupidest, bravest thing of my first life. I threw myself over it and would not move, and the steward, following orders, struck me instead. The dog vanished into the storm that night, and I never saw it again, and 11 years later I would kneel over that same steward's dying body, while my stepmother wept camera-ready tears for the censor, and the accusation she'd spent a decade preparing would finally close its jaws around my throat. I was not going to make the same offering to the same fire twice. This time, I went to the gate already knowing what I would find, and I opened it myself instead of waiting for morning to find it for me. And there, in the freezing mud, was the dog, black-furred, one eye swollen shut, ribs like the slats of a broken chair, exactly as I remembered, except this time I looked at it the way I had learned to look at things over 18 years of a life that had taught me, brutally, to see what was actually in front of me instead of what I wished were there. Its blood did not smell like blood. It smelled faintly, impossibly, of scorched sandalwood and something colder underneath, something that made the fine hairs on my arms rise the way they used to rise in the presence of a cultivator drawing on deep reserves of chi. and where the wound on its flank had torn the fur away, the skin beneath was not pink. It was the color of old bruises, mottled violet black, and threaded through it, faint as a vein of ore in stone, ran a pattern that no natural animal's skin had ever worn. A spiral, precise as a quartz seal, pulsing once, weakly, in time with its ragged breath. A suppression seal. I had seen one only once before, in my first life, carved into the wrist of a criminal cultivator being marched to execution, and the memory of it slotted into place beside what I was looking at with a click I felt in my back teeth. This was not a dog. I did not scream, I did not run for the steward, or my father, or anyone who would turn this discovery into a weapon before dawn. 18 years of practice, most of it earned in the ashes of my own naivety, had taught me exactly one useful thing. The moment you announce what you know, you hand it to whoever is standing closest, and in that house, whoever was standing closest was never on my side. So I knelt in the mud in my thin sleeping robe, rain soaking through to my skin, and I looked into the one working eye of the creature the world would have called a stray dog, and said very quietly, in the tone I would have used for a wounded man rather than an animal, "I know what you are. I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to tell anyone. I am only going to help you, if you'll let me." The eye that was not swollen shut regarded me with an intelligence no dog had ever possessed, weighing me like a starving man weighs whether a stranger's hand holds bread or a blade. And then, slowly, unmistakably, it exhaled, a breath too long, too controlled, too much like relief, and let its head drop against my knee. I carried him to the woodshed myself, wrapping him in my own outer robe because I did not trust a servant to gossip about a fetched blanket, and I want to be honest about what I felt doing it, because false modesty has no place in the accounting of a life lived twice. I felt the particular dangerous calm of someone who has just been handed a second chance and intends to spend every part of it wisely. I did not know, that first rain-soaked night, that I was carrying the Lord of the Nine Shadows sect into a woodshed on my back like a sack of grain. I did not know his name was Yi Bei Ming, or that half the cultivation world above the mortal court believed him already dead, ash scattered across the bramble wastes after a betrayal so total it had taken his entire inner circle with it. I did not know that the seal cut into his flank had been carved there by someone who called him brother, and that it had bound not just his cultivation but his very shape, folding a man who could once part mountains with a single palm strike into a starving animal small enough to drown in a drainage ditch and be forgotten. All I knew that night was that I had been given back my childhood, and I was not foolish enough this time to spend my only currency of kindness on people who would use it as evidence against me. This time I would spend it correctly. This time I would spend it on the one creature in that entire house who could actually understand what it meant to be discarded by people who were supposed to protect you. I fed him in secret for 11 days, stealing dried meat and rice wine from the kitchens with a discipline that would have astonished the girl I'd been before I died. No reckless daytime visits, no telling a single soul, entering and leaving the woodshed only at the 2 hours of night when the household guards rotation left the eastern wall finished, a gap I remembered perfectly because in my first life I had once overheard a guard complaining about it. Small things, things a person only knows if they have already lived through the mistakes that taught them. On the 12th night, the seal on his flank cracked. I was sitting beside him doing the mending work I used the woodshed visits to disguise. My stepmother approved of me spending evenings sewing. It was one of the few activities of mine she praised, because it kept my hands busy and my opinions quiet. when I heard a sound like a temple bell struck underwater, and the spiral mark on his skin split down its center and began, very slowly, to bleed light instead of blood. "Don't move," I said, before I had fully decided to say anything, because 18 years of watching Chi behave in dangerous, unpredictable ways when disturbed mid-transformation had taught me that stillness was survival. "Whatever this is, don't fight it. Just breathe." He made a sound low in his throat that was not a whine. It had never, I understood now with the clarity of hindsight, been a whine. Not once in 11 days. It had been a language I simply hadn't had the frame of reference to translate. And the light poured out of the crack in the seal like water finding a fault line in a dam, and the dog's body began, joint by joint, to lengthen and reshape itself in the dark of that woodshed, folding upward, folding taller, until it was no longer a dog's ribs shuddering under my palm, but a man's, and I was kneeling in a woodshed at midnight with my hands pressed flat against the bare, blood-marked chest of a stranger who had, until roughly 4 seconds ago, been the family dog I was secretly keeping alive on stolen rice. He was beautiful the way a drawn blade is beautiful, not soft, not comforting, a beauty that existed to be respected rather than admired. Black hair, unbound, fell past shoulders still marked with the fading spiral of the seal. His face, even slack with exhaustion, had the particular stillness of someone who had spent a very long time being looked at and learned to give nothing away. And his eyes, when they opened, both of them now, the swelling gone as though it had never existed, were the deep banked red of embers under ash, and they fixed on me with an attention so absolute I felt it against my skin like a physical weight. "You knew," he said. His voice was low, rough with 11 days of disuse, and carried an authority that had nothing to do with volume. "You knew what I was." I suspected, because precision mattered, and because I was already recalibrating everything I thought I understood about the last 11 days. I confirmed when I saw the seal properly that first night in the rain. I decided it changed nothing about what I intended to do, which was help you, so I saw no reason to announce it and complicate matters. Something moved behind the ember red of his eyes, not quite surprise, something closer to recalculation, the look of a man revising an assessment upward. "Most people," he said slowly, "upon discovering they have been sheltering a sealed cultivator of unknown allegiance in their family's woodshed, do not respond with logistics. Most people," I said, "have not already died once because they trusted the wrong family members to have their best interests at heart. I have. I try not to make the same category of mistake twice." I said it plainly, without the theatrical weight such a confession would have carried in my first life, when I still believed vulnerability was a kind of currency that people spent honestly. I have learned since, I had learned even by 11 days into this second childhood, that some truths are best delivered the way you'd deliver a fact about the weather, flatly, and without asking anyone to feel a particular way about it. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that would have unsettled a lesser resolve, though I suspect he intended exactly that, testing what a girl of 11 summers did under scrutiny, the way you'd test the give of a rope before trusting your weight to it. "Ye Bei Ming," he said, "Lord of the 9 Shadows Sect, though there are those who currently believe that title buried with my ashes in the bramble wastes. I would prefer that belief to persist a while longer." "Su Waning," I said, "3rd daughter of Marquis Su Zhangye, though there are those in this household who would prefer I hadn't survived my mother's death to inherit the title at all. I imagine we understand each other." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more clinical, the expression of a man cataloging a fact he found unexpectedly useful. The seal took 11 days of consistent nourishment and absolute discretion to crack even this far. A lesser sealing would have broken in 3. Whoever cast this one intended me to starve slowly enough to feel every day of it. You interrupted their intention. Good, I said, and meant it with a coldness that surprised even me, though it shouldn't have. I had died once already at the hands of people who enjoyed watching things starve slowly, and I had come back with very little patience left for anyone who practiced that particular cruelty on someone else. Good. Whoever they are, I imagine you intend to have words with them eventually. Eventually, he agreed, is generous phrasing for what I intend. The ember red of his gaze did not waver from mine. You should be more afraid of me than you appear to be, Su Wanning. I am not a stray you have adopted. I am not tamed by rice and kindness, whatever the last 11 days may have suggested to you. I never thought you were tame, I said. I thought you were starving and injured and pretending to be something you weren't because pretending was the only shape that kept you alive long enough to heal. I know exactly what that looks like, my lord. I have been doing the same thing in this house since I was 7 years old. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Not testing now, but something closer to recognition. 2 people who had each spent a long time performing smallness for an audience that would have destroyed them for showing their real shape too soon. They hurt you, he said. It was not a question. Regularly, I said. Creatively. My stepmother has spent a decade building the case that I am unstable, ungrateful, and dangerous to be around, so that when she finally moves against me directly, everyone who might have protected me will already believe I deserved it. I heard the flatness in my own voice and did not soften it. In my first life, that plan worked perfectly. I died in this house's courtyard with the entire household certain I'd earned it. I had not meant to say first life aloud. It slipped free before I'd finished deciding whether he'd earned that truth yet, and I watched him hear it, watched the recalculation happen behind his eyes a second time, faster now, a man used to processing impossible information without wasting time being astonished by it. Reborn, he said quietly, and it was not disbelief in his voice. It was something closer to recognition, as if the word explained a great deal he had already half suspected watching an 11-year-old girl move through a household of adults with the calculated stillness of someone 3 times her age. How long ago did you die in the life before this one? I don't know exactly, I said, old enough to understand my family clearly, young enough that I still believed, right up until the end, that clarity would be enough to save me. I met his eyes without flinching, because flinching was a currency I had also stopped spending. It wasn't. Understanding a trap perfectly and having no leverage to escape it are 2 very different problems, my lord. I have spent this second childhood solving the second one. Something settled in his expression then. Not warmth, I want to be precise about this. He was not a man who wore warmth easily, even at his most unguarded, but something adjacent to it. A decision quietly reached and quietly kept. The rice you have been stealing, and the discretion you have maintained for 11 consecutive nights without a single misstep, those were not the actions of a frightened child comforting herself with a pet, Su Wanning. Those were the actions of someone running an operation. I have had practice, I said, at surviving people who would use any weakness against me. Sheltering you correctly was simply the same skill, applied to a different problem. He was silent again, and this time when he spoke, his voice had dropped into a register I hadn't heard from him yet. Quieter and colder, the voice I would come to understand much later that the cultivation world associated with the 9 Shadows Sect's judgments, the voice he used only when he had already decided something and was merely informing the room of the outcome.
Then let us solve your problem as well. The seal on me will not hold much longer regardless of what either of us does. You have already loosened it past the point of stability, whether you intended it or not. When it breaks fully, my strength returns with it, and I find myself, for the first time in longer than I care to admit, in the debt of an 11-year-old girl who fed a starving dog rice from her own bowl and asked for nothing in return. His ember eyes held mine, and there was nothing soft in them, only a promise made in the flat, precise language of a man who did not make promises lightly. I do not forget debts, Su Wanning, and I have considerable experience dismantling households that believe cruelty is a private matter no one outside their walls will ever be permitted to witness. Outside the woodshed, the rain had finally begun to slacken, and somewhere across the compound, a rooster miscounted the hour and crowed too early into the dark, the way it always did. The same rooster, the same false dawn, the same house sleeping in ignorance of everything shifting quietly in its own woodshed. I thought of my stepmother's rehearsed tears, of the censor's convenient visit still 11 days from repeating itself if I let this life run its course unaltered, of the steward whose blood I would not be kneeling in this time, and I felt something in my chest that I did not have a gentle word for. It was not hope exactly. Hope had gotten me killed once already. It was closer to the cold, clean satisfaction of watching a lock finally begin to turn. Then heal, I told him, and meant it as both kindness and instruction. Heal completely, my lord, on your own timeline, in whatever secrecy you need. I am not in a hurry. I have already learned the hard way that the people who destroy households patiently are the only ones who ever succeed at it. I paused and let the next words land with all the flat, unhurried certainty of a girl who had spent an entire second lifetime, however brief so far, learning exactly how much silence a person could hold before it became a weapon. Take whatever time you require. My family has spent 11 years teaching me the precise, specific shape of their cruelty. When you are strong enough to answer it, I intend to make certain you know exactly where to aim. For the first time since the seal had cracked, Yi Bei Ming, Lord of the Nine Shadows Sect, smiled, not warm, not gentle, but real, the expression of a predator recognizing with something like relief that it had finally found itself in the company of another one.
Then we understand each other perfectly, Su Wanning, he said. Sleep. I will still be here in the morning as a dog again if anyone comes looking, and as something considerably less patient the day I am not. His eyes held mine a moment longer, banked embers in the dark of the woodshed. And when the day comes that I stand in this house at my full strength, I want you beside me to watch it. Every part of it. You have earned that, if nothing else. I left the woodshed before the household guard's rotation closed the gap in the eastern wall, slipping back into my cot with rain-damp hair, and a calm settled so deep in my chest it felt almost unfamiliar after a first life spent flinching at footsteps in the hall. Above me, through the same broken lattice that had let the storm in, the sky was beginning very faintly to lighten toward morning, the same morning that in my first life had arrived indistinguishable from every other morning in that house, one more unremarkable day in 11 of them. This time, I lay awake and watched the dark thin toward dawn with the particular patience of someone who finally, after a lifetime and a death, had something worth being patient for. The seal did not break cleanly. It broke the way ice breaks on a slow river, in stages, with long stretches of stillness between each crack, so that the household changed around us in careful increments, while I went on playing the quiet, unremarkable third daughter nobody in that house had ever bothered to watch closely. I had forgotten, in the years since my first death, how much information a person surrenders simply by assuming no one is paying attention.
My stepmother, consort Lin Ruyan, had built her entire position in the Marcus's household on that assumption, and in my first life, it had cost me everything, because I had been exactly the audience she counted on, grateful for scraps of her attention, too young to recognize performance when it was staged for me specifically. This time, I watched her the way I imagined a physician watches a patient's symptoms, cataloging rather than absorbing, and within a season, I understood the architecture of her cruelty better than she likely understood it herself. She was, to the household at large, a model of grace. She oversaw the kitchens with an efficiency the servants respected. She composed poetry my father praised at dinner. She raised her own daughter, my half-sister, Su Wanru, into a girl universally described by every visiting matron as accomplished, skilled at the zither, gifted at embroidery, quick with the kind of clever remark that made grown men laugh and think well of her father's household. Lin Ruyan's cruelty toward me was never delivered in front of witnesses that mattered. It arrived in the small currency of omission, a birthday unmarked, a cold meal served an hour after everyone else's, a tutor too occupied to include me in lessons my half-sister received without asking, each incident individually forgettable, cumulatively a slow education in the fact that I did not belong to the family whose name I carried. Wanru was, if anything, worse, because she had learned cruelty as a game rather than a survival strategy, and games are crueler than strategies precisely because the person playing them enjoys it. She was 2 years my senior and had spent both of those years perfecting a particular skill, saying something devastating in a tone so light that if I objected, it would be I who seemed unreasonable. Third sister looks tired again. Is she not sleeping well? Perhaps she has bad dreams about mother. My mother, who had died bringing me into the world, was Wanru's favorite weapon, deployed always with a soft, concerned face that made every adult within earshot conclude Wanru was a sensitive girl, worried for her stepsister's well-being. I let her believe I hadn't yet learned to recognize the shape of it. That too was strategy. A predator who believes its prey hasn't noticed the trap will keep setting the same one, and the same trap set enough times eventually tells you everything about the person who built it. My father remained, as he had in my first life, a man who mistook the absence of visible conflict for the presence of peace. Marcus Su Zenya loved me, I believe, in the abstract, uncomplicated way a man loves an idea he does not examine closely. His late wife's daughter, a duty discharged by ensuring I was clothed and fed and married eventually to someone respectable. He was not cruel. He was worse than cruel in the particular way absent remains cruel.
Authority is worse than active malice. He had handed the daily governance of his household entirely to a woman who despised his dead wife's memory, and he had done it so gradually, over so many small abdications, that by the time I was old enough in my first life to understand what had happened, there was no single decision I could point to and say, "There, that was the mistake." It was 1,000 small mistakes, compounding, the way debt compounds when no one is paying attention to the interest. I catalogued all of it that second time through, not because it wounded me. The wounds of a first life, however raw they had once been, had scarred over into something closer to data by the time I died and returned, but because I intended, this time, to make every single grievance count toward something. Ye Bei Ming healed across 4 months, though healed undersold what I watched happen in that woodshed on the nights I could reach him. The seal broke in 3 further cracks, each one accompanied by a night of light bleeding from his skin like something trying to escape a cage that no longer fit it. And each time, when the light settled, more of him returned. Not merely strength, though I could feel that changing in the air around him the way you feel weather changing before a storm, but precision. The dog who had watched me with a wounded animal's wariness became gradually something else entirely.
A man who watched me with the unhurried, total attention of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any room he occupied, and who had simply chosen, for reasons of his own, not to be dangerous toward me. He asked me questions in those months that no one else in that household had ever thought to ask a third daughter. Not, "Are you well?" which people asked when they wanted the social credit of having asked without the burden of hearing an honest answer, but specific, uncomfortable, useful questions. What time does the Eastern Wall Guard rotation change, and has it always been that guard, or is he new? Who in the kitchens reports directly to your stepmother, and who reports to the head cook instead? Does your father's steward, the one from your first life, the one who struck the dog, does he still serve this household? And does he still follow your stepmother's instructions without question, or has that loyalty ever wavered? I answered every question honestly and completely, because I had already decided somewhere in that first midnight conversation in the woodshed that Ye Bei Ming was the one relationship in my second life I did not intend to manage the way I managed everyone else, with careful, calculated distance. It was not blind trust. I want to be precise about that, because blind trust had never once served me, and I did not intend to start practicing it now. It was trust built the way trust is supposed to be built, on 11 days and then 4 months of consistent, verifiable behavior. He had never once in all that time asked me to take a risk on his behalf that he did not take an equal or greater risk on mine. When a sect scout, I learned later it was a scout, though at the time I only knew it as a stranger asking too many questions in the village near our estate, came close enough to the manor to threaten discovering him, Ye Bei Ming spent 3 days as a dog again by choice, silent and starving, rather than risk drawing attention that might fall on me for harboring him. "You could have simply left," I told him, the night the scout finally moved on, watching him drink water too fast, the way something does when it has denied itself longer than it needed to out of caution rather than necessity. "You could have," he agreed. I did not. He did not elaborate further that night, and I did not press him,
Because I had already learned that Yi Bei Ming explained himself on his own timeline and no other. And that timeline, I was beginning to understand, ran considerably warmer than his manner suggested. It was in the 5th month, on the night when the last fragment of the seal finally shattered entirely, and he stood in the woodshed at what I understood, without needing to be told, was his true and full strength. The air around him gone thick and cold the way it does before lightning, his shadow on the wall behind him briefly, impossibly, wearing a shape too vast and many-limbed to belong to any man, that he told me, for the first time, who had sealed him and why. And I understood that the story I had inherited from my first life, the story of an abusive household I intended to dismantle in careful revenge, had just widened into something considerably larger. "My sect elder," he said, once the air in the woodshed had settled back into ordinary stillness, and he had, with visible effort, folded that vast, waiting power back down into something that fit inside a room again. "Zhao Yun Feng, my father's oldest friend before my father died, and after, the man I trusted to hold the Nine Shadow Sect steady while I completed a closed-door cultivation attempt 3 years ago, a bid for a breakthrough that would have secured the sect's standing for a generation. He sealed me the night I emerged from seclusion, weakened and unguarded exactly as he'd calculated I would be, and let the sect believe I had died attempting the breakthrough. He has ruled in my name and my supposed memory ever since." His voice carried no heat when he said it, which somehow made it worse than if it had. "There is very little I do not know how to survive, Su Wanning. Betrayal by someone I trusted with my life is, unfortunately, not new information to me. I only regret that it took me 3 years and a farm girl's stolen rice to claw my way back to a shape capable of answering it." "Then we have 2 households to dismantle," I said. If the flatness of my own voice startled him, he did not show it. "Mine and yours. I don't see why we should treat them as separate problems when both were built by people who mistook patience for weakness. Something in his expression shifted then. Not quite surprise, we had moved past the stage where I could still surprise him with my nerve, but something closer to genuine pleasure, dark and satisfied. You continue, he said, to exceed every expectation I did not know I was forming. I did not tell him that night about the wild card, because I had not yet identified her as one, not with certainty. Chen Shu had come into our household 8 months before I died the first time, a cousin's daughter from a minor branch of my mother's family, installed as my personal attendant under circumstances that had never entirely made sense to me, even with a lifetime of hindsight to examine them. In my first life, I had trusted her completely, told her things I told no one else, and in the final weeks before my death, she had grown strange and distant in ways that I had been too grief-stricken by everything else collapsing around me to properly investigate. I did not know, still, whether she had betrayed me or simply survived by keeping her head down while everyone else's schemes closed around me like a fist. This time, I resolved to watch her the way I watched everyone, carefully, without assuming either innocence or guilt, letting her actions accumulate into an answer rather than deciding one in advance. She arrived at our household again this second time through, on almost exactly the same date as before, and I received her with the same warm, unguarded gratitude I remembered offering the first time, not because I had forgotten what came after, but because I had learned that changing my behavior toward her too visibly, too soon, risked altering whatever calculus had led to her original choices, whatever those choices had actually been. If I wanted to understand what truly happened with Chen Shu, I needed to let the same conditions play out and watch, this time with open eyes. "You seem different lately, third miss," she said to me one afternoon, some 6 months into my second childhood, as she worked a comb gently through my hair in the quiet of my chambers, one of the few spaces in that entire household where no one else's ears reached. "Calmer, almost as if you know something the rest of us don't." I met her eyes in the bronze mirror rather than turning to face her directly, a habit I had cultivated deliberately, because a person's first unguarded reaction is easier to read in reflection when they believe you are not truly watching them. "Perhaps I have simply decided that worrying about what I cannot control accomplishes nothing," I said. "What would I know that the rest of the household doesn't?" Something crossed her face in the mirror, too quick to name with certainty, gone before I could decide if it had been curiosity or calculation, or something closer to guilt, before she smiled and returned to the comb. "Nothing, I'm sure," she said. "Only that Consort Lin has been asking after you more than usual, whether you seem to be keeping any unusual company, whether you've been slipping out of your chambers at night." I kept my hands still in my lap, though every instinct I had built across 2 lifetimes went taut at once. "And what did you tell her?" she said. That I hadn't noticed anything, and met my eyes fully in the mirror for the first time in the conversation, something unreadable and deliberate in the look. Should I have, third miss? I have thought about that exchange more times than I can count, turning it over the way you turn over a stone, looking for what's written on the underside. It could have been warning. It could have been threat, delivered gently enough to be deniable. It could simply have been a frightened girl in an impossible position, doing the only thing available to her, leaving me a door I could choose to walk through or not, without ever committing herself to either side of it. "No," I said finally, "there's nothing to notice. I simply sleep poorly some nights and walk the gardens when I can. Nothing more interesting than that." "Of course, third miss," Chen Shu said, and resumed the comb, and neither of us spoke of it again for a long while,
But I understood from that afternoon forward that my stepmother had begun watching me more closely than I had accounted for, and that whatever protection 4 months of careful discretion had bought me, it was beginning to run out. I told Ye Beiming that same night, once the household had gone quiet enough for me to reach the woodshed unseen, and he listened with the particular motionless attention I had come to recognize as his version of taking something seriously. Then we no longer have the luxury of unlimited patience. A suspicious stepmother with eyes in your own chambers is a fuse burning to a flame I would prefer to control the timing of rather than have it chosen for us. He was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again, there was something in his voice I had not heard from him before. Not quite gentleness, he did not deal easily in gentleness, but a kind of careful weighing, as though he were handling something he did not want to break by rushing it. I am close to my full strength, Su Wanning, close enough that within a season, perhaps 2, I will be capable of leaving this woodshed as myself in daylight and beginning what I came back for. But I find myself reluctant to move before you are ready for what comes after, because once I move against your household, there is no version of this that ends quietly. Your stepmother will not simply be inconvenienced, she will be destroyed, publicly and completely, and your father's household name along with whatever remains of his complicity in it. I would have you certain that is truly what you want before I give it to you. I thought of the courtyard stones in my first death, cold beneath my knees, and my stepmother's rehearsed tears catching lamplight for an audience that mattered to her more than the truth had. I thought of 11 years being taught, meal by unmarked birthday by cold dinner, that I did not belong in the only family I had. I have had a lifetime and a death to decide what I want, my lord. I am not asking you to be gentle with them. I am only asking that when it happens, I am standing close enough to see every part of it land. The ember of his eyes held mine in the dark of the woodshed, and this time when he smiled, there was nothing measured in it at all. Then we will not wait a full season, he said. We will wait exactly as long as it takes to be certain the fall is total and not 1 day longer. I find, Su Wanning, that I have grown considerably less patient than I once was about what happens to people who mistake children for prey. Outside, the season had begun to turn. The plum trees along the eastern wall, the same trees that had sheltered a stray stripe on the worst night of my remembered life, were beginning very faintly to bud, promising blossoms within weeks. I sat with that thought a long time after I left the woodshed that night, turning it over the way I turned over everything now, cataloging rather than merely feeling, that the same season that had once marked, in my first life, the beginning of the end, this time was going to mark something else entirely.
I did not yet know that the scout who had passed too close to our estate 5 months earlier had not, in fact, moved on for good. That he had reported back to a Sect elder named Zhao Wunfeng exactly what he suspected he'd glimpsed in a minor marquis's household, and that Zhao Wunfeng, ruling a demon sect in the dead man's name for 3 years, had grown considerably too comfortable with his stolen authority to risk losing it to a rumor he could not yet confirm but did not intend to ignore. I did not know that the fuse Ye Beiming and I believed we were still controlling the timing of had already, weeks earlier, been lit from a direction neither of us was watching. I only knew that night beneath the budding plum trees that for the first time since I opened my eyes in the rain to find myself 11 years old again, I finally had something with teeth standing beside me, and that whatever came next, I did not intend to face it kneeling. The trap came on the night of the Lantern Blossom Festival, and I want to be honest about how close it came to working, because pretending otherwise would insult the woman who said it.
Consort Lim Ryan had not survived 14 years as the power behind a weak marquis's household by being careless, and the trap she built for me that spring was, in its way, a small masterpiece of patience. The household held a modest celebration each year for the festival, lanterns strung along the covered walkways, a shared meal in the outer hall, a performance by a troupe of traveling musicians my father favored, and it was, by long tradition, the one night of the year when even a third daughter as unremarkable as myself was permitted to walk the gardens after dark without a chaperone questioning it, because half the household did the same, trailing lantern light through the plum trees to admire the blossoms by moonlight. In my first life, I had loved that night without reservation, the one evening I felt almost ordinary. This time, I understood exactly why my stepmother had chosen it. She wanted me walking the gardens alone. She wanted witnesses to my direction. And she had, I would learn before the night was through, arranged for someone to be waiting at the eastern wall specifically to observe where a third daughter's unsupervised wandering actually led her. I did not learn the shape of the trap until I was already inside it, which is, I have come to understand, the entire design of a good one. The evening began ordinarily enough. My father, in one of his rare expansive moods, praised the lantern arrangements Wanru had overseen, and Wanru accepted the praise with her customary grace. And somewhere in the performance of that small domestic scene, she found the opening she always found, the soft, public cruelty dressed as concern. "Third sister looks pale tonight. Are you unwell again? You've seemed so tired these past months. Mother worries you aren't sleeping properly." "I sleep well enough," I said, and let it end there, because I had learned across 2 lifetimes that engaging Wanru's bait only fed it. "That's good to hear," Lin Ryan said smoothly, setting down her cup with the unhurried precision of a woman placing a piece on a board she had already finished arranging. "I confess I've noticed the same thing your sister has. You retire early most nights, and yet you never seem rested. I do hope you aren't wandering the grounds unescorted after the household sleeps. A young lady's reputation is such a fragile thing to risk over sleeplessness." I felt the trap close around the edges of that sentence as she smiled through it, the particular cold clarity that had kept me alive through 11 years of my first life snapping into focus. She was not guessing. Someone had told her I left my chambers at night, and she had chosen tonight, in front of my father and the household's attending relatives, to plant the accusing her publicly enough that whatever she produced next would land on ground already prepared to believe it. "I walk the gardens sometimes when I can't settle," I said, keeping my voice level, unhurried, the voice of someone with nothing to hide because there was, as far as this conversation's audience needed to know, nothing to hide. As I imagine half the household does tonight, given the festival. "Of course," Lin Royan said, and let the matter drop with a warmth so convincing that if I had not already lived through 14 years of her particular grammar of cruelty, I might have believed she meant it. My father certainly did. He returned to his wine, satisfied that his wife had raised a small maternal concern and been gently, reasonably answered, and the meal continued. And I sat through the rest of it with my pulse steady and my mind already several moves ahead, cataloging every possible shape the next hour might take. I did not go to the woodshed directly that night. I walked the gardens first, visibly, among the other lantern-lit wanderers, laughing softly at something a young cousin said, letting myself be seen exactly where a third daughter innocently enjoying a festival evening ought to be seen. And only once I was certain I had been noticed by enough of the right people, only once the crowd along the walkways had thinned toward the outer hall for the musician's second performance, did I let myself drift, unhurried, unremarkable, toward the eastern wall.
I felt him before I saw him, not Ye Bei Ming, but the stranger, crouched in the shadow of the drainage ditch, close enough to the woodshed that my stomach turned cold with understanding, even before my eyes adjusted to the dark and confirmed what I already knew. A man in plain dark robes, unremarkable enough to pass for a hired laborer to anyone who did not look twice, positioned exactly where he could watch anyone approaching the woodshed door. I did not go to the woodshed. I want to be precise about that, because it is the decision that saved everything that came after. I stopped a full 10 paces short, in the open, where the last of the lantern light from the walkway still reached, and I said in a clear voice pitched to carry to a hidden watcher, without seeming performed for one, "I thought I heard something out here, probably just a stray." Then I turned around and walked back toward the lanterns, my heart hammering in a rhythm I did not let reach my face, and I did not look back once. I found Chen Shu waiting near my chambers when I returned, ostensibly to help me out of my festival robes, and I studied her in the lamplight with the same careful, uncommitted attention I had given her for months, searching for the tell that would finally answer the question I had been sitting with since our conversation at the mirror. "You seemed shaken, third miss," she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite guilt, but adjacent to it, the strained carefulness of someone picking each word like stepping stones across water she wasn't certain would hold her weight. "It was a lovely festival," I said, giving her nothing, and watched her face for the flicker of relief or disappointment that would tell me which side of this she'd landed on. What I saw instead was neither. What I saw was fear. Plain, unrehearsed fear, the kind that does not know how to perform itself convincingly because it has never had to. "Third miss," she said, very quietly once she'd finished with the outer robe, and we stood alone with the lamp turned low. "May I speak plainly just this once?" "You may always speak plainly with me," which was not entirely true of the household at large, but had, across the last months, become entirely true between the two of us, whatever her allegiances truly were. "Consort Lin asked me directly 3 days ago whether I'd noticed you leaving your chambers at night. I told her I hadn't. I lied to her, third miss, and I have never lied to Consort Lin about anything in the 2 years I've served this household, because I understood the day I arrived here exactly what happens to servants who displease her." Her hands, I noticed, were trembling slightly where they'd folded the discarded robe against her chest. "I don't know what you're doing at night, and I've decided I don't want to know, because whatever it is, I think it matters to you more than my safety should be allowed to cost you. But she isn't going to stop asking, third miss, and I don't know how many more times I can lie to her face before she notices I'm doing it." I looked at this girl, 2 years older than me, installed in my household under circumstances neither of us had ever fully understood, who in my first life had grown distant in my final weeks, and whom I had spent this second life waiting with careful, uncommitted patience to reveal herself as either enemy or ally, and I understood with a clarity that settled something in my chest I hadn't realized was still unsettled, that Chen Shu was a wild card because she was exactly as frightened and exactly as powerless in that household as I had been before I died and came back with a second chance she had never been given. "Thank you," I said, and meant it with a warmth I had been rationing carefully for months, because trust, once extended honestly, is not a thing to be taken back cheaply. "What was I watching for tonight? Whoever that was out past the eastern wall. I saw you turn back before you reached him." I studied her a moment longer, weighing what I owed her against what I could safely give, and settled on a version of the truth precise enough to be useful and incomplete enough to protect what still needed to be protected. "Someone Consort Lin sent to watch where I go at night. I have my reasons for those walks, Chen Shu, reasons I'm not yet ready to explain fully even to you, but I promise you this, whatever comes of tonight, I do not intend to let it land on you. Whatever price gets paid for what I've been doing, it will be paid by me and by the people who deserve it, not by a girl who lied to protect me at real risk to herself." Something in her face eased then, not fully. Fear like hers does not resolve in a single conversation, but enough that I understood, watching her, that I had just gained something I had spent this entire second life uncertain whether I would ever have. An ally inside that household who chose me, deliberately, knowing the cost, rather than one who simply hadn't yet been tested. I reached the woodshed the following night. Once I was certain the watcher had been withdrawn, Ye Beiming confirmed it before I said a word, meeting me at the door already alert in a way that told me he'd sensed the danger even before I could report it, and told him everything: the dinner table, the watcher at the eastern wall, Chen Shu's confession. He listened in silence, and when I finished, the stillness that settled over him carried a different quality than his usual composure, something colder and more focused, the particular quiet of a predator recalculating distance to prey it had previously chosen to let live a while longer. "That was not your stepmother's man," he said, finally. I went cold. "What do you mean?" "I felt him," Ye Beiming said, "the moment he came within range of this wall. Your stepmother's household guards carry no cultivation worth noting. I would know it, the way you know the difference between a candle and a bonfire. Whoever watched this wall last night was trained, disciplined qi, carefully suppressed to pass as an ordinary man, the kind of control that takes years of sect discipline to achieve." His eyes had gone the deep, banked red I had learned meant he was holding something dangerous very carefully in check. "That was one of Zhao Yunfeng's men," Su Wanning. "The scout who passed near your estate 5 months ago did not simply move on. He reported what he suspected he'd glimpsed, and my sect elder has finally grown curious enough to confirm it directly." "Your stepmother's timing and his," I said slowly, understanding arriving in a cold rush, "may not have been a coincidence at all." "It may not," he agreed. "A woman suspicious enough to plant a watcher of her own on the same night a sect scout does the same is either extraordinary luck or your stepmother's inquiries into your nighttime wandering reached ears beyond this household's walls before either of us accounted for. Either way, we no longer have the season of patience I promised you. Whatever protection remained to us in moving slowly ended the moment Zhao Yunfeng's man confirmed I am alive." His expression, when he looked at me then, had none of the coldness the rest of his voice carried, something closer, I would understand only much later, to the particular gentleness a dangerous man allows himself only toward the one person he has decided is worth being gentle for. "I am sorry, Su Wanning. I would have given you more time to prepare for what comes next, if the world had permitted it." "I have had a lifetime and a death to prepare," I said, though even as I said it, I felt the ground beneath the plan we'd built together shifting into something less controlled than either of us had wanted. "What happens now?" "Now," Ye Beiming said, "I stop hiding as a dog in your family's woodshed, because that particular disguise has already been seen through by people considerably more dangerous than your stepmother. Now I decide whether to move against Zhao Yunfeng first to secure what remains of my sect before he can consolidate further, or move against your household first, while I still have the advantage of surprise." His eyes held mine, and I understood, in that look, that he was truly asking, not simply informing me of a decision already made. Both cannot happen at once, not fully, not with the precision either deserves. Tell me honestly, Su Wanning, which matters more to you, that I move quickly or that I move completely? I thought of my stepmother's rehearsed tears, and my half-sister's soft, cruel concern, and my father's comfortable, willful blindness, and the 11 years of my first life spent believing that clarity alone would someday be enough to save me. I thought, too, of Chen Shu's trembling hands, and the price she had already risked to protect a truth she didn't even fully understand. "Completely," I said. "I did not survive dying once to watch you rush this and leave half the rot standing. If you move against my household, I want it total, every lie my stepmother has told about me unmade in front of the same people who believed them.
and if Zhao Yunfeng requires your full strength before you can safely turn here, then let him have it first. I have waited a lifetime for this. I can wait a season longer if waiting means it lands exactly as hard as it should." Something shifted in his expression at that. Approval, I understood, but something warmer running underneath it too, a current I had felt building between us for months and had been, with my usual caution, refusing to examine too closely. "Then here is what I propose. I leave within the week, not fleeing but returning openly to what remains of my sect to reclaim what Zhao Yunfeng stole under cover of a lie he has enjoyed telling for 3 years. It will take time, it will not be quiet once it begins, and word of a demon sect lord returned from the dead will travel faster and farther than either of us can fully control. Your household may hear of it before I return for them specifically. I need you to be ready for that, ready to hold your position here, unremarkable and unsuspected for as long as it takes me to finish what I start elsewhere, and ready to trust that I have not forgotten what waits for me here the moment I am free to attend to it." "And if my stepmother moves against me before you return?" I asked, because precision mattered, because I had learned the hard way that hope built on someone else's timeline, unexamined, was how I died the first time. "Then you send word," he said, and reached into the fold of robes that had reformed around him with his true shape, drawing out a small, unremarkable token of black jade, cool and faintly warm at its center, the way qi-infused objects always were. "This carries a fraction of my spiritual signature. Break it and I will feel it wherever I am, the way you'd feel a struck bell even at a
Distance. I will come, Suanying. Whatever state my own affairs are in when you do. That is not a promise I make lightly, and it is not one I will fail to keep." I closed my hand around the jade token, cool and steady against my palm, and felt something settle in my chest that I recognized with some surprise as the particular, unfamiliar shape of being protected by someone who had chosen to protect me rather than been obligated to. "Then go. Reclaim what's yours. I'll be here when you're ready to reclaim what's mine, too." He left 3 nights later, in the deep dark before the household guard's rotation changed, and I watched from the shadow of the eastern wall as the man who had spent 5 months as a starving stray in my family's woodshed unfolded, briefly, into something the plum trees themselves seemed to lean away from, vast and dark and edged with a power that made the night air taste faintly of scorched sandalwood before he mastered it back down into something that could move unseen across open country and vanished into the dark toward whatever remained of the 9 Shadows sect. I did not see him again for 4 months. In that time, I want to be honest, my stepmother's suspicion did not fade. If anything, deprived of a watcher to confirm or deny her instincts, it curdled into something more careful and more patient, and she began, in small increments I catalogued the way I catalogued everything now, to test the boundaries of what she could accuse me of without proof. A missing hairpin, quietly suggested to have been sold by a daughter with expenses she couldn't otherwise explain. A conversation about my mother's dowry, raised at dinner in a tone that implied, without ever quite stating, that I had been asking too many questions about inheritances I had no business inheriting. I answered each test the way I'd learned to answer everything in that house, across 2 lifetimes, calmly, precisely, giving her nothing to build a case from, and I held the black jade token against my palm most nights before sleep, and I waited, the way I'd promised I would, for word that would tell me it was finally time. It came on a morning in early summer, not as a message but as a rumor, a traveling merchant's gossip, repeated at our dinner table by a cousin who thought it merely an entertaining curiosity about a demon sect in the northern mountains that had, in the span of a single season, been shaken to its foundations by the return of a lord everyone had believed dead, and a sect elder who had ruled in his name for 3 years now found himself, according to the gossip, standing trial before his own sect for a betrayal 3 years old. "Imagine," Wanri said lightly, delighted by the drama of it the way she was delighted by any scandal that did not touch our own household.
ruling in a dead man's name for 3 years, only to have him walk back through the gates alive. I wonder what becomes of a person who's told that particular lie for that long. I kept my face carefully neutral, my hand closed loosely around the black jade token I had taken to keeping in my sleeve, and thought, with a satisfaction I did not let reach my expression, soon you will not need to wonder. Soon you will learn exactly what becomes of people who build their comfort on lies, because I intend to show you personally. He returned on the night of the Ghost Festival, 6 weeks after the rumor reached our dinner table, and he did not come as a stray this time, nor as a shadow slipping unseen along the eastern wall. He came through the front gate of the Sioux estate at the head of a procession that stopped the entire household mid-breath. Black lacquered palanquins trimmed in silver, banners bearing the 9-fold shadow sigil of his sect snapping in the evening wind, and cultivators in formal black robes flanking him in a formation so disciplined it looked to the household guards less like an honor guard and more like a verdict already rendered. I was in the garden when the gate bell rang, and I felt the black jade token warm against my palm a full breath before the first shout went up in the front courtyard, and I understood, with a calm that surprised even me after months of waiting for exactly this moment, that it was finally time. By the time I reached the front hall, my father was already on his knees. I want to describe this carefully because it was the first time in either of my lives I had seen Marquis Su Zhenyi brought low by anything, and there is a particular satisfaction in watching a man discover all at once that the comfortable ignorance he'd built his whole household upon was never actually protection, it was simply the absence, until now, of anyone powerful enough to punish him for it. Ye Bei-ming stood in the center of the hall in robes the color of a starless sky, the lord of the 9 Shadow sect restored to his full height and his full authority, and the household that had for 5 months unknowingly fed and housed and beaten a demon sect leader disguised as a dying stray in their woodshed was only now understanding, in a single collapsing moment, exactly what had been sleeping in their woodshed. Marquis Su, Ye Bei-ming said, and his voice filled that hall like cold fills a room before you feel it. Not loud, never loud, the same quiet authority I'd first heard directed at me in a woodshed months ago, except now it carried the weight of an entire reclaimed sect behind it. I understand your household kept a stray dog in its gardens some months past. I have come to discuss what became of it. My stepmother's composure, I will grant her this much credit, held longer than my father's. Lin Ruyan rose from her own bow with a steadiness that spoke to 14 years of practiced grace, and said, in the smooth, accommodating tone she used on anyone whose favor mattered to her, "My lord honors our household with his presence. I confess I don't recall any stray of particular note. Servants, perhaps, mention such things occasionally. If it caused offense, I assure you it was dealt with according to household discipline, nothing more." "Dealt with according to household discipline," Ye Bei-ming repeated, and something in the stillness of the hall told me before he spoke again that this was the moment I had waited a lifetime and a death for. I was that stray, Concert Lin. I have imagined, many times in the months of patient waiting between the woodshed and this moment, what her face would look like when the truth finally landed on her without warning, without the luxury of preparation, in front of the entire household and a procession of witnesses she could not dismiss or discredit. I had imagined satisfaction. I had not accounted for how quiet
It would actually feel standing at the edge of that hall and watching every ounce of color drain from Consort Lin Ruyan's face as the story assembled itself behind her eyes. The beaten dog, the missing poodle blamed conveniently on a stepdaughter she'd wanted discredited anyway, the steward's blow that should have killed something far more dangerous than she'd understood at the time. "That is not possible," she said, and for the first time in 14 years of watching her, I heard something genuine crack through the performance. Not grief, not remorse, only the cold arithmetic of a woman realizing in real time the scale of what she had done wrong. "It is entirely possible."
Ye Bei-ming said. I was sealed by an act of betrayal within my own sect, bound into that shape to die slowly and unremarked in whatever gutter I happened to fall into. I fell into yours. His gaze moved, deliberately, unhurried, across the assembled household, my father's still on his knees, Wanru frozen with her hand half raised to her mouth, the servants pressed against the walls, not daring to move, before it settled, finally, on me, standing quiet and composed at the edge of the hall, exactly where I had chosen to stand so that everyone present would see precisely who he looked to next. Your third daughter found me half drowned in a drainage ditch and fed me from her own bowl for 11 days before the seal even began to crack, at considerable personal risk, expecting nothing from me in return. She continued to shelter me for 5 months after that, at greater risk still, once she understood exactly what I was. I am not here tonight to discuss a stray dog, Consort Lane. I am here to discuss what this household did to the only person in it who showed a wounded stranger genuine kindness. The hall was utterly silent. I watched my father's face move through disbelief and then slower towards something that might have been shame if he had the courage to sit with it rather than immediately reaching for deflection. My lord, he said, still on his knees, if my household has offended you in ignorance, I beg— Your household, Ye Bei-ming said, and the mildness of his tone made the words land harder than shouting would have, beat me nearly to death for a crime I did not commit, on the word of a girl. His eyes flicked, briefly, coldly, to Wanru, who flinched as though struck, who fabricated the accusation to punish her stepsister for the offense of loving something that wasn't hers to love. And when your daughter threw herself over me to stop the beating, your steward struck her instead, on your wife's instruction, and you were not present to see it, because you have made a lifelong habit of not being present for the things your wife does in your name. He let that settle, unhurried, before continuing. I do not hold ignorance as a full defense. A man who builds his peace on refusing to look closely at his own household is not innocent of what happens there. He is simply comfortable. I watched my father absorb that, watched something in his face finally, belatedly, begin to understand what 14 years of comfortable ignorance had actually cost him, and I felt no pity for him. I had spent an entire first life waiting for him to look closely enough to see me, and he never had. Not until a demon sect lord stood in his front hall and forced the seeing on him by threat rather than love. What is it you want, my lord? Lin Rian asked, and her voice had steadied again, the practiced composure reasserting itself now that the first shock had passed, already calculating, I could see it in her eyes, toward whatever negotiation might still save her position. Compensation certainly is owed, whatever recompense would satisfy. I am not here for compensation. I am here for accounting. He turned, and for the first time since entering the hall, his voice softened, not weak, never weak, but warm, in a way I had felt directed at me only in the private dark of a woodshed, now offered openly, deliberately in front of the entire household, whose opinion of me had been built on 14 years of my stepmother's careful lies. Su Wanning, come stand beside me. I crossed that hall with every eye in it following me, and I felt for the first time in either of my lives what it meant to walk towards safety rather than away from danger in my own family's front hall. When I reached him, Ye Bei-ming did not reach for my hand or offer any gesture of possession. He simply turned so that we stood shoulder to shoulder facing the household that had spent 14 years teaching me I did not belong to it, and let the household see, plainly, exactly where his loyalty had landed. 3 days from now, I will hold a formal accounting at the Nine Shadows Sect's Northern Hall, to which Marcus Su's household is cordially and non-negotiably invited. There, in front of witnesses whose opinion matters considerably more than a censor's convenient timing, his eyes flicked to me at that, and I understood he had asked, at some point in the months I hadn't seen him, exactly what shape my first death had taken. I will lay out in full the accusation your stepmother built against you, the evidence that disproves it, and the consequence each person in this hall bears for their part in it. You will not need to defend yourself, Su Wanning. I intend to do the defending, publicly, completely, and I do not intend to be gentle about it. I watched my stepmother's face in that moment, the careful composure cracking at the edges as she began finally to understand the true scale of what was coming for her, and I felt the cold, clean satisfaction I had been waiting a lifetime and a death to feel, arriving not as rage exactly, but as something quieter and more permanent, the slow, certain understanding that the ground beneath her 14 years of careful cruelty had just irrevocably begun to give way. The northern hall of the Nine Shadows sect, when I saw it 3 days later, was nothing like the dark, foreboding place a household gossip had painted a demon sect as being. It was vast and formal, lined with black stone pillars and hung with silver-threaded banners, built for exactly the kind of proceeding Ye Bei-ming intended to hold there, not a battlefield, but a court, and I understood, walking into it at his side, while my father's household filed in behind us under guard that was polite but unmistakably not optional, that he had chosen this venue deliberately to give my humiliation the same formal public architecture my stepmother had spent 14 years denying me. Zhao Yunfeng knelt at the center of the hall when we entered, stripped of the sect elder robes he had worn for 3 stolen years, and I felt Ye Bei-ming's attention sharpen briefly at the sight.
Him, before returning deliberately to the matter at hand, a promise, I understood, of what still waited after this, held carefully in reserve rather than forgotten. "Let the record show," Ye Bei-ming said, once the hall had settled and every witness, sect elders, a handful of neighboring nobility invited specifically for their standing in the mortal court, and the entire trembling household of Marquis Su had taken their places, that this proceeding concerns 2 related matters. The first, the betrayal of Ye Bei-ming, Lord of the Nine Shadows sect, by his sect elder Zhao Yunfeng 3 years past. The second, the systematic cruelty inflicted on Su Wanning, 3rd daughter of Marquis Su Zhengye, by her stepmother, consort Lin Ruyan, and half-sister Su Wanru, culminating in an incident 5 months ago in which this same household, in ignorance, beat their sealed and defenseless lord nearly to death and struck Su Wanning for attempting to protect him. He laid it out with a precision that left no room for the soft deflections Lin Ruyan had built her entire position on. The missing poodle produced, alive and well, from the kitchen servant, who had been quietly hiding it the whole time, having found it wandering 3 streets over the very week it went missing, and never having dared correct consort Lin's version of events. The steward, brought forward under sect compulsion that made lying physically impossible, confirming under whose direct instruction he had struck an 11-year-old girl protecting an animal that had never harmed anyone. Chen Shu, called forward with visible fear that eased, slowly, as Ye Bei-ming's questioning made clear she was being protected rather than punished, confirming the pattern of surveillance Lin Ruyan had ordered against me in the weeks before. Lin Ruyan's collapse, when it finally came, was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was quiet. The particular unraveling of a woman who has spent her entire adult life building her worth on other people's good opinion, watching that opinion turn in real time in a room too formal and too witnessed for her to salvage with tears. The neighboring nobility, whose good regard she had spent 14 years cultivating, watched her exposed with the cold, distant curiosity of people recalculating whether her household was still worth associating with, and I understood, watching her face as that realization landed, that this, not violence, not banishment, simply the total public death of the reputation she had built her whole identity around, was precisely the accounting Ye Bei-ming had chosen for her sin. "You will relinquish your position within Marquis Su's household," Ye Bei-ming said, once the account had been laid bare in full,
his voice carrying the same unhurried authority that had filled his sect's northern hall as easily as it had once filled a village woodshed. You will retire to a modest residence with an allowance sufficient for comfort and no more, and you will make no further claim on any matter concerning Su Wanning's inheritance, marriage, or standing in this life or in any negotiation your family attempts hereafter. Should you violate this accounting in any particular, I will hear of it, and I will return. Wanru's sin, when its turn came, was mirrored precisely to its shape. She had built her cruelty on manufactured reputation, whispered concern that made her seem the sympathetic sister, while I was cast as unstable, and Ye Beiming's accounting stripped that reputation as publicly as it had been built, laying out for the assembled nobility every fabricated concern, every soft, cruel remark, until the accomplished, beloved second daughter of the Su household stood exposed as something considerably less sympathetic than the household's dinner table had ever permitted anyone to see. No marriage prospect worth having among the mortal nobility, now fully informed of her character, would survive that hall's memory. My father received the gentlest accounting, and I understood, watching Ye Beiming deliver it, that this too was deliberate. Not mercy exactly, but a different shape of consequence, tailored to a different sin. You are not condemned for cruelty, Marquis Su. You are condemned for comfort. For 14 years you chose not to look closely at your own household, because looking closely would have required you to act. I will not strip your title, I will not exile you, I will simply ensure, through witnesses now assembled and unlikely to forget what they saw here today, that your comfortable ignorance is a story this region tells for a very long time, so that the next father tempted toward the same comfort remembers what it cost the daughter he failed to see. When it was finished, when the hall had emptied of nobility carrying gossip that would outlast every rehearsed tear Lin Ruyan had ever produced, when Zhao Wunfeng had been led away to whatever accounting Ye Beiming intended for him separately, when my father's household filed out diminished and hollow in a way 14 years of my own suffering had never managed to make them, Ye Beiming turned to me in the emptying hall, and for the first time since the front courtyard, his voice lost its formal weight entirely. "Is it enough?" he asked, and there was something almost uncertain in it, a man who had just dismantled an empire of small cruelties, asking genuinely whether it had landed the way I needed it to. I thought of the courtyard stones in my first death, and the 11 years that had led me there, and the strange, unearned gift of a second chance I had spent this entire life determined not to waste. "It's more than I ever let myself hope for in either life," I said. I looked at him, not the starving stray from the drainage ditch, not the lord of the Nine Shadows sect who had just leveled a household's reputation in a single formal hour, but simply Ye Beiming, the only person in either of my lives who asked what I wanted before deciding what I deserved. "Thank you for not making me kneel through this one alone. You have never knelt through anything alone since the night you opened that gate, whether either of us fully understood it yet at the time." He held out his hand, not a formal gesture, not the practiced grace of court, simply an offer, open and unhurried, the way you'd offer something to a person you trusted to take it or not on their own terms. "Come, I have a sect that needs rebuilding, and I find I would rather rebuild it with you beside me than return to a black jade token and an empty woodshed, waiting for word that might come too late again." I took his hand, and outside the northern hall's tall doors, the last of the evening light caught on silver-threaded banners bearing the 9-fold shadow sigil, and I thought, walking out of that hall,
Into a life, finally, entirely my own, that some debts take a lifetime to come due, and some kindnesses, offered without expectation of return, take exactly as long to be repaid in full. Zhao Yunfeng's accounting came 3 weeks later, in the same northern hall, though this proceeding drew a very different audience, not mortal nobility this time, but the assembled elders and disciples of the Nine Shadows sect itself, called to witness the formal reckoning of the man who had ruled in their true lord's stolen name for 3 years. I attended at Ye Baiming's side, not as a spectator this time, but as something the sect's disciples had already, in the weeks since our return, begun quietly calling the Lady Who Fed the Seal Loose, a title that embarrassed me faintly and pleased me more than I let show, because it meant the sect understood, without needing it explained twice, exactly what those 11 days of stolen rice had actually purchased. Zhao Yunfeng's sin, unlike Lin Ruyan's accumulated small cruelties, was a single act, but it was the kind of single act that requires a lifetime of prior trust to make possible, and Ye Baiming's accounting of it carried a different weight because of that, colder and more exact. "You were my father's friend before you were mine," Ye Baiming said, standing over the kneeling man with none of the formal distance he'd shown my stepmother. This was older grief, wearing the shape of judgment. "I trusted you with the sect's governance because I had known you since before I could walk unaided. You sealed me the moment I emerged weakened from seclusion, let the sect mourn a death that never happened, and ruled 3 years in the memory of a boy you'd watched grow up, rather than surrender an authority that was never yours to keep." His voice did not rise. It never rose, I had learned. That was not how Ye Baiming delivered judgment. "I do not ask why. I have had 3 years sealed in an animal's shape to consider every possible answer, and none of them soften what you did. I ask only whether you intend to contest the account or accept it." Zhao Yunfeng, gray-haired and stripped of every trapping of the office he'd stolen, did not contest it. He said, "I told myself I ruled better than you would have, still unseasoned as you were. I told myself the sect was safer in careful hands than in ambitious ones. I believed it long enough that I stopped noticing when it became a lie I told to keep what I'd taken." He met Ye Baiming's eyes without flinching, and there was something almost like relief in his face, the particular relief of a long-carried weight finally set down. "I accept the account, my lord, whatever it costs." The sect stripped him of rank and standing. Exiled rather than executed, Ye Baiming's mercy, I understood later, extended not from forgiveness, but from a colder calculation. A man who had once been trusted enough to nearly succeed at what Zhao Yunfeng attempted made a more useful warning alive and diminished than dead and quickly forgotten. It was not the vicious ending my own household had feared for themselves. It was, I came to understand, entirely intentional. Ye Baiming's justice was precise to the sin it answered, and Zhao Yunfeng's sin had been ambition dressed as duty, not cruelty for its own pleasure. The punishment fit the crime the way a key fits a specific lock, and nothing about it was performed for spectacle. Chen Shu came to me in the sect's guest quarters some weeks after, in the quiet, uncertain manner of someone who'd spent 2 years learning that kindness offered too openly was usually a trap in disguise, and asked, without quite managing to look at me directly while she asked it, what would become of her now that the household she'd served no longer had any claim worth serving. "Whatever you want to become of you," I told her, and watched her flinch slightly at an offer that plain, unused to choices that didn't come with hidden costs attached. "You lied to Consort Lin at real risk to yourself to protect a truth you didn't even fully understand yet. I don't forget debts either, Chen Shu. I learned that from someone who taught me rather thoroughly. Stay here if you'd like, and build whatever place for yourself the sect will let you build. Or go, if you'd rather, with resources enough to build a life somewhere the name Sue means nothing to you at all. Either way, you choose it. Nobody chooses it for you this time."
She stayed in the end, not out of obligation, but because she told me months later it was the first household in her life that had ever let her simply exist without calculating what her presence cost anyone. I made certain in the years that followed that it stayed that way. My father's household, stripped of the reputation Lin Ruyan had spent 14 years building and the marriage prospects Wanru's exposed cruelty had cost her, settled into a diminished, quiet existence that neither destroyed them outright nor restored what they'd lost. I visited twice in the year that followed, not out of forgiveness exactly, but out of something closer to completion. A need to see with my own eyes that the ground had truly shifted and would not shift back. My father was different those visits, quieter, the comfortable ignorance finally, permanently punctured. It was not warmth between us, not the relationship I'd have chosen if either of my lives had gone differently, but it was honest for the first time, and I found I could live with honest where I had once hoped foolishly for love. I stood, a year after the Northern Hall's first accounting, in the plum orchard along what had once been the Sioux Estate's eastern wall, the same trees that had sheltered a starving stray on the worst night of my remembered life, blooming now in the particular, unhurried way plum trees bloom regardless of what has happened beneath their branches. And Ye Bai-ming found me there, the way he always seemed to find me exactly when I needed finding, rather than a moment before. "Regretting the visit?" he asked, settling beside me with the easy stillness that had once been a wounded animal's wariness, and had become, across 2 years, something closer to home. "No," I said, and meant it. Only thinking about how strange it is to stand in the place I died once and feel nothing but quiet. I looked at him, lord of a sect he had reclaimed and rebuilt into something steadier than it had ever been under either his own careless youth or Zhao Yunfeng's stolen caution, and the one person across 2 entire lifetimes who asked what I wanted before deciding what I deserved. I used to think surviving my family would be the whole of the story, that once I'd solved that, there wouldn't be anything left to want.
"And now?" he asked, and there was something careful in the question. A man who had learned across 2 years of my particular caution not to assume answers before they were freely given. "Now, I think," I said, "that surviving them was only ever the beginning. I'd like to see what the rest of it looks like, with you, if you're still offering." He did not answer with words, not immediately. Ye Bai-ming had never been a man who reached first for speech when something quieter would say it more truly. He simply took my hand, the way he had in the emptying Northern Hall a year before, open and unhurried, an offer rather than a claim, and we stood together beneath the blossoming plum trees that had once sheltered nothing but a starving, secret thing neither of us had yet understood we would come to need. I had died once, kneeling in a courtyard, believing that clarity without power was worth nothing at all. I had been given, impossibly, a second chance to learn otherwise, that clarity, held long enough and spent carefully enough, could become its own kind of power, patient enough to wait 5 months in a woodshed for a seal to crack, patient enough to wait a lifetime for the people who taught you unworthiness to finally, publicly be shown the shape of what they'd built. The blossoms fell around us the way they always had, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath them, but for the first time in either of my lives, I stood beneath them not waiting for the next blow to land, but simply, finally, at rest.